So, you want to learn about Warhammer 40,000. Maybe you saw that Henry Cavill's about to make it mainstream, or maybe you just think it looks kind of nifty. Well, in this video, I'm going to try to get you up to speed on what Warhammer is, what the world is like, and the cheapest and best ways to get into the hobby that fits the way you want to do it, because there's a bunch of ways. So, right off the bat, what is Warhammer 40K? Well, it's a franchise that takes place in a fictional 41st millennia, made by a company called Games Workshop, which back in the day was publishing Dungeons and Dragons in the UK, as well as the Judge Dredd game, and many others. Lord of the Rings, all that good jazz. And they decided, hey, why don't we make our own game? So after they made a fantasy game, they went off and they made a sci-fi game. Now, unlike D&D, which is role-play with combat, they made combat with a bit of roleplay, and by the time you get to now, big games like a regular Warhammer 40K game, there are narrative ways to play games, but it's mostly shooty kill. And that really does seem to make people happy. If you want something more roleplay intensive, that would be something like Inquisitor, which isn't a currently supported game, but there are a bunch of people online and communities that are willing to help you get into it anyway, because it is, well, pretty well loved by fans. The setting for Warhammer 40K is that essentially, further into our future, a man arrived known as the God Emperor of Mankind. Now, he didn't like being called a god. He was actually a hardcore Reddit atheist because he believed that if you worshipped him, you might accidentally worship the Chaos Gods, which are the embodiment of the worst traits of all of the galaxy. And don't worry, humanity isn't entirely to blame for them. Mostly the Dark Elves of the space universe are called the Dark Eldar, but that's details that you don't necessarily need to get into it. Basically, the whole setting was invented as an excuse that every faction could fight every faction. So the Eldar can fight, the Dark Eldar can fight the Tau, can fight the Imperium of Man, can fight the Chaos Cultists, can fight the Genestealers, can fight the Tyranids, can fight the Necrons, can fight the Squats, and or Leagues of Votann. That might sound a little confusing. Don't worry about it. At one point, the Necrons were a group that were basically Terminators that were all controlled by a bunch of people who had enslaved them. But fans were like, well, why would my Necron army fight my friend's Necron army if they're on the same system? So they changed the lore in a really cool way and made it so that it would make sense you could fight. Because at the end of the day, this is a role-playing fighting game, so you need to be able to fight, even if you and your buddy like the same faction and play the same faction. So I guess I'll briefly go into what those factions are. The Eldar are one of the oldest races around in the Warhammer 40K setting. They basically achieved Star Trek level technology and utopia before humanity was even a sparkle in a caveman's eye. But that led to stagnation and boredom, which led to depravity, and their depravity and exploration of sensation led to the creation of Slaanesh, the dark god of sexy, painful things. And that's no bueno. And that's a real problem for, well, everyone, but specifically the Eldar, who now get their souls snatched up anytime they die. And they don't like that, so they put their souls in Infinity Stones that they are very protective of. And they also created entire planet-sized ships to constantly hide from them. Basically, the Eldar and Dark Eldar are the elves and dark elves of space, but they're also a little bit taller than usual and really good at shooting people. You've also got the Orcs, who used to be the Krorks, who were used in a battle of the old gods, who are basically the comedic relief of the whole thing, and they're just there to have fun and be silly. And they never evolve to Krorks anymore because they don't have an enemy dangerous enough for them to evolve to that point. It's like being stuck at Pikachu and never reaching Raichu. They're dangerous to everyone in the normal world because they're fungus, meaning if you blow up an orc with a K, because they found that when they made their fantasy franchise, they couldn't trademark orc with a C because they didn't invent that, so all of their orcs now have Ks in Games Workshop. That's just a fun tidbit. If you blow up an orc, fungus will grow, and eventually it will turn into a little orc, which will turn into a bigger orc, and a bigger orc, until eventually he dies again. So they're really hard to defeat unless you want to blow up a whole planet. And yes, people will do that to stop the orcs. The Tyranids are your basically Zerg Rush. Basically, army of flesh-eating bugs. They gain abilities from the things they consume, makes them very scary. It's very Starship Troopers, and they're getting a whole bunch of really cool new models these days. Then you have the Genestealer Cultists, which are humans who have been infected by a secret hidden Tyranid who's been like poisoning the water supply or food or, whatever. And these people will see their monstrous mutated brethren and this big Tyranid as these beautiful Brad Pitt from Troy gods who are just like an Adonis. They're gorgeous. And they will destroy planets and ruin the infrastructure and summon the Tyranid High Fleet and then be consumed and then be eaten. So kind of, it's a happy ending from their perspective, but it's a bad ending from everyone else's perspective whose planet just got eaten. You got the Necrons, who were originally called the Necron Tier. They were basically born in space Chernobyl. They didn't like that. They asked the gods for help. The gods said no, so the other gods said, we will help, but it was a trick, and it put them all into robot bodies and sucked their souls out. And then years later, there was that retcon where fans were like, how are my Necron fighting other Necrons? So they made it where the Necrons gained some sentience back, some of them did anyway, and rebelled and enslaved their masters and now carry them around like gigantic batteries made of god power to shoot at their enemies. And they mostly just like sleep in underground temples waiting for everyone else in the galaxy to die because they just want to get their humanity back and they just hate everyone. They're really cranky and tired, which I think we can all relate to. The Tau are the sort of anime-inspired faction. They fight for the quote-unquote greater good, but that wasn't grimdark enough, so they got changed to where they may or may not be manipulated by a group that can use pheromones to make you do whatever they say, and they lie and say that every army needs that in order to help control it, but a guy named Farsight found out that after his guy died, and they were still an effective fighting force, that was not true. So he started the Farsight Enclave, where he's like, hey, I don't like regular Tau, but you can come join us. And in both versions of the Tau, they will accept pretty much anyone into their group, which means any other faction can in lore join, and sometimes even on the tabletop be fielded as someone that can fight alongside them, which is kind of cool. They're basically Big Blue Star Trek, but scarier, with mechs and Gundams, which is, I think, pretty cool. And since they do have some darker secrets to some of their factions, I think they fit the setting just fine. Some people said they don't like the mech thing, that it doesn't fit a grim, dark universe. I think if you look at it from a Bioshock diesel punk like angle, you can absolutely make it fit. Plus, mechs are just always cool. I guess next we should talk about the Squats, who were humans who went over to planets that were near black holes or really high gravity areas, which made them grow shorter. They were miners. They got cut off from the rest of humanity, and so they eventually reconnected with humanity hundreds of years later, being real short boys. Now, allegedly, the Tyranids ate all of them because Games Workshop was tired of making their models for a while. But they've recently come back as the Leagues of Votan, where they have these Votan, which are gigantic quantum supercomputers, which are super not allowed in the modern day. And they're also friends with like little robot buddies that are sentient, which is also not normally allowed in humanity. So they just don't tell anyone. They're super secretive, and they're super cool, and they have a special ability called Judgment Tokens, and they just, like, if you shoot or offend them, they judge you, and then they're better at attacking you, which I think is really funny, and I think I also have that ability, which is, I didn't know that I was in the game. You've got humanity, which is generally the Imperium of Man. The Imperium of Man originally was a big non-religious faction because, again, praise might accidentally praise one of the 4 Chaos Gods, or 5, there may be another one lurking. And they were working alongside the Emperor of Mankind, doing good stuff. The Emperor made a whole bunch of super soldier children who then had super soldier children of their own. They aren't really children. It's like a regular soldier gets injected with some of the like genetic material from a specific Primarch, which is a son of the Emperor, who is basically a demigod. Each of them are, which makes you into basically what Master Chief wishes he was. I say that as a big Halo fan. And they're super hardcore tough boys, which is cool. And they were all friends until one of the sons was betrayed and tricked by Chaos, and there was a big civil war, and it caused the Emperor to be entombed on a golden throne, which now serves as a beacon to allow people to navigate in faster-than-light warp travel without him humanity would be cut off from each other across the cosmos. And most of the Primarchs have been battle damaged or assumed dead or gone evil, because it's a dark time. So humanity is really kind of on the back foot there. They've got some of their Primarchs that have come back, but not as many as Chaos. And Chaos would be the Primarchs and the humans who have joined the dark forces of evil, either because they wanted to or because the alternative was to be tortured and killed by Chaos. And there's Khorne, the blood god. He's all about murder. Real god of war type of dude. Like Kratos, Sparta era would have loved this guy. Slaanesh, we already talked about, god of sexy pain. Tzeentch, the god of trickery, changey things. And then you've got Papa Nurgle, who is the god of like pestilence and poisons and disease, but he thinks that he's sharing his gift with you. Come to his garden of Nurgle, where he shares his gift of undeath with you. You'll be a walking pustule monster, but you will never die. So there you go. He's your friend. He's your friend, man. He's not your friend. Do not let him into your house. He is a bad man. And he looks like a big frog. There's other factions from that. Like there's the Ecclesiarchy, which have the Sisters of Battle, which are warrior space nuns. You know, there's the Imperial Guard, which are just regular humans, and there's a bunch of flavors of those. And within the Eldar, there's also the Harlequins, which sound exactly what they are. They are gigantic murder clowns in space, but they're kind of cool because they're like, their fight is a dance that tells their history. It's weird. Anyway. Oh, and there's also the Mechanicus, which is a human faction, and they're basically like, they worship space toasters. They're all about tech. They were locked on Mars and became like super steampunk Mad Max, and now they praise litanies onto your weapons and pray to the spirit of your gun to make it shoot better. It's super cool. I'm sure I've forgotten some. I don't have a script. This is all off the cuff. So if you want to get into it, honestly, the best way to get into it is Kill Team, which is a smaller skirmish-based gameplay. You'll have anywhere from like 5 to maybe 10 characters that you have to build and paint, or you can go to certain places and online and commission people to build and paint your minis for you if you're not into painting them and putting them together. The glue can be difficult, especially for like the human-sized guys, like Genestealer Cultists. Their arms are so small. So you should get into Kill Team if you want to test it. It also allows you to spend as little money as possible to try out all the different groups and get a feel for how you want to play, because they do all play differently. They'll all have different rules, and sometimes there's options like what type of weapon you want to give them and all this other stuff, so you can play around and learn. Otherwise, I actually think you'd be better with the new, what is it called? Imperialis is what they're calling it now. It used to be called Epic 40K, which is basically, instead of 28mm miniature dudes, they're like...
What is this? A center for ants?
They're itty-bitty boys. And basically on a little tiny puck that you would normally have a regular soldier, you have like a platoon of soldiers, which allows you to field huge cathedral robots and waves of armies. And it's really not as expensive. And you can do it all on a smaller space, so if you don't have a huge gaming area, that works too. I think that's super duper cool. Also, it's easier to travel with, so if you're going to your friend's house or having someone come over, it's way easier to store when you're not using it. I think these are all amazing bonuses. And you get to use a lot more of the rules and abilities of the entire army. And then if you want to scale up to building an army of 28mm guys and tanks and planes and mech armor and the whole nine, well, you already kind of know what you like because you've tested it out at a small platoon scale with Kill Team, or on an army scale with the new version of Epic 40K. Of course, there's a bunch of ways to do 40K. There's, objective, seek and destroy. There's just shooting each other off of the board. There's a bunch of different rules and ways you can do it, and certain groups will keep old rules active even after Games Workshop has put out new rules to play with. Basically, it's like playing an older edition of D&D when everyone else has moved on. You may not be able to play in tournaments, but that's usually for tryhards anyway, so don't feel bad. And if you don't want to play Warhammer 40K, you don't want to paint 40K, you don't want to build 40K, you can still be a Warhammer 40K fan. You can watch the animations that have come out. You can listen to the audiobooks or read the books themselves. Dan Abnett is kind of a universal check that guy out type of thing. And also, if you're not sure what faction you want to go with, picking up like a $7 to $20 book might be cheaper than buying a $40 box of collectibles. That being said, you can also do what's called Warhammer. Instead of normal terrain that you would buy and build, you put together some cardboard, you get some toy army men that are roughly the right size, and you label them of what they are, and you test out, okay, well, it turns out I always wanted to build this tank, but it sucks for my army, I'm bad with it, so I'm going to not go buy that model, and instead I'm going to use something else. And it's a good way to play test the type of army you would want without buying all of the things you might want. And we always have extra, boxes and cardboard and all kinds of junk around. It's called Pour Hammer or Floor Hammer because sometimes it's also played on the floor. And there's no shame in it. It's just a fun way to play test something you might do or to test reinforcements you might build or buy, but you haven't committed to. Ah, boy. So yeah, you can read the books, you can watch the animations. Maybe by the time you're watching this, Henry Cavill's already released some of the movies and TV shows at Amazon. You can enjoy that. You can be a fan of Warhammer without ever picking up a Warhammer model. And you can be a Warhammer fan by only ever playing with Warhammer models, but never knowing any of the lore, because it's all Warhammer, right? And if you like it, then you like Warhammer. If Warhammer's on the box of the thing you bought and you like that thing, then you're a Warhammer fan. If you never buy anything and you only watch battle reports on YouTube or videos like this, guess what? You're still a Warhammer fan because you are enjoying Warhammer stuff. So don't let anyone make you feel bad for not spending money. We don't monetarily shame people, especially with the economy the way it is. You play the way you want to play. And if that means just imagining yourself as an inquisitor in your head and coming up with adventures that you write down and you tell your friends, that's just as valid as rolling a buttload of dice and moving hundreds of dollars worth of plastic across a tabletop. So, that is the very surface level version of what is Warhammer 40K and how do you get into Warhammer 40K based on your playstyle and your price range. There's going to be specific models that you can look for specific factions, but if you've never played Warhammer, you might not even know what faction you want. But I encourage you to look up lore videos about the factions that you're interested in, because frankly, I don't think there is a lame faction in Warhammer. I think if someone handed me a really well-painted set of Warhammer dudes from really any army, I'd be pretty stoked about it, because they're all pretty nifty. So that is the bare minimum entry-level knowledge to tantalize you and give you enough information for you to go on your journey now and have a direction to point yourself and learn things. I hope this has been informative for you. I hope it helped give you enough of a sense of direction to orient yourself and go find the information you do want. I have a playlist that some of the factions more specifically talked about and gone slightly more in depth to give you information. It's a playlist. You can find it on my channel. There's a bunch of other channels that will spend hours and hours and hours just talking about one character. So if you want to go to that level, that's there. If you want to go to the surface level, just get your feet wet, you've got that. And there's everything in between. The YouTube community is super helpful. Some of it is wrong and it's memed out and it's a little exaggerated, but generally you'll be pointed in the right direction. It's not real, so it's not a big deal if you get certain things wrong. Have a great day. Stay safe out there. Emperor guide you and protect you. May the warp have no hold over your soul. Hallelujah.